Picture a single image. Madison Square Garden, New York City. March 4th, 1967. A Saturday evening. The arena is packed. 50,000 people crammed into every tier, every balcony, every standing room shadow at the back of the hall. The noise is physical, a wall of sound. And then, without warning, it stops. Not gradually, not in stages. All at once. In the center of the floor, beneath a single spotlight that carves the room into dark and light, stands a man who weighs 138 pounds. He is 5 feet 7 inches tall. He is wearing street clothes, black slacks, a fitted dark jacket, no gloves, no wraps, no mouthguard. His hands hang at his sides. His eyes are completely still. Across from him stands Viktor Zelenov, 6 feet 3 inches, 247 pounds, the reigning Soviet national full-contact champion, undefeated in 34 consecutive sanctioned bouts across 4 countries. His corner team had 3 people. His arms alone were the circumference of the smaller man's torso. The smaller man does not move forward. He does not speak. He simply waits. And that is when the crowd went silent. What happened in the next 11 seconds, 50,000 witnesses would spend the rest of their lives trying to describe. Some said it looked like lightning caught in a human body. Some said it looked like nothing happened at all, until suddenly everything was different. This is that story. March 4th, 1967. New York City smells like winter rain and hot pretzels and exhaust fumes from the cabs lined up along 33rd Street. It is 7:42 in the evening. The Garden has been electric since 6 o'clock, since the first undercard bout, since the moment word spread through the martial arts community that something unprecedented was going to happen tonight. The event was billed as the first international martial arts exhibition, a showcase rather than a competition, organized by Ed Parker, the legendary Kempo Grandmaster and founder of the American Ed Parker International Karate Championships. Parker had spent 3 months assembling a lineup of demonstrators from 6 different disciplines: American Kempo, Japanese Judo, Korean Hapkido, Chinese Kung Fu, Russian Sambo, and 1 entry that wasn't listed in the program at all. Viktor Zelenov had flown in from Leningrad 5 days earlier. He was 29 years old. He had begun training in Sambo, Samozashkita bez Orazia, the Soviet system of self-defense without weapons, at age 11, under the direct instruction of Anatoly Karlampiv, the man credited with systematizing the discipline into a national sport. By the time Viktor was 17, he had won his first national youth title. By 22, he was representing the Soviet Union in international exhibition bouts, a role that was as much diplomatic theater as it was athletic competition. His record was 34-0. Not a single loss. Not a single draw. Of those 34 victories, 27 had come by submission, opponents tapping out rather than allowing their joints to continue bending in directions they were not designed to bend. The other 7 had ended by what the Soviets called privedeny v besoznatelnoy sostoyanai, rendering unconscious, through a controlled choke or cranial pressure technique that left no lasting injury, but an unmistakable lesson. He stood in the corridor behind the main floor at 7:15 p.m., wearing his competition uniform, a blue jacket and matching trousers, the design adapted from a traditional Russian peasant garment. His warm-up had taken 40 minutes. He had performed 200 repetitions of his core grip strength exercise, crushing a rubber ball the size of a grapefruit in each hand, the tendons in his forearms rising and falling like cables under tension. His interpreter, a thin man named Grigory, stood 3 feet to his left. Viktor Zelenov was not arrogant. That matters. He had seen enough of the world's fighters to know that arrogance was the fastest way to end a career. He was simply accurate. He had an accurate assessment of his own capabilities and an accurate assessment of what any given opponent could bring. When Ed Parker's assistant had told him that evening's demonstration might include an unscheduled challenge from a local martial artist, Viktor had nodded and asked one question. What style? The assistant had said, something he invented himself. Viktor had smiled, not unkindly, just accurately. People who invented their own styles, in Viktor's experience, were people who had mastered the performance of fighting without mastering the reality of it. They were impressive in demonstrations. They were less impressive when the distance collapsed to 0 and someone with 247 pounds of trained muscle was controlling the angle of their spine. 43 minutes later, Viktor Zelenov would understand that he had never been more wrong about anything in his life. He arrived at Madison Square Garden at 6:53 p.m. in a cab from the corner of 56th and Broadway. He was wearing what he always wore when he wasn't performing: dark slacks pressed to a crease, a fitted dark jacket, leather shoes. No jewelry, no emblem, nothing that announced him. Bruce Lee was 26 years old. He weighed, that evening, 138 pounds. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall, the measurement he gave on every form, though those who trained with him insisted he stood slightly shorter when he wasn't consciously straightening. He had begun studying Wing Chun Kung Fu at the age of 13, under the direct instruction of Ip Man in Hong Kong, the same Ip Man who had systematized the style centerline theory, the principle that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, and that the practitioner who controls the centerline controls the fight. By 1967, Bruce Lee had trained for 13 years. In those 13 years, he had developed what he was beginning to call Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist, a philosophy of combat that had no forms, no fixed techniques, no sacred methods, only principles, economy of motion, simultaneous defense and offense, the elimination of everything unnecessary. He found Ed Parker near the corridor entrance. Parker was a large man, solid and careful, and when he saw Bruce, he lowered his voice the way people lower their voices around something they want to handle without disturbing. "You don't have to do this," Parker said. "He's 34 and 0, Bruce. He's the real thing." Bruce Lee looked at Parker for a moment. Then he looked down the corridor toward the floor. His hands, and the people who knew him always noticed this about his hands, were hanging loose at his sides. The knuckles were scarred, not broken skin scarred, calloused, the kind of scarring that comes from 10,000 repetitions of a single strike against the same wooden training dummy, the Muk Yen Jong, practiced since adolescence until the nerve endings had reorganized themselves around the impact. He said, very quietly, "I know he is." And that was when Grigory, Victor's interpreter, came around the corner and stopped. He looked at the man in the dark jacket. He looked at Parker. He said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then he turned and walked very quickly back the way he had come. The challenge happened in public. That part was not planned. Ed Parker had intended the evening's final demonstration to be cordial, a controlled exchange between 2 martial artists from opposite traditions, performed for an audience of enthusiasts and filmed for educational purposes. What he had not anticipated was the contingent of 22 Soviet athletic officials who had accompanied Viktor Zelenov to New York, or the fact that 3 of them had spent the better part of the evening circulating through the arena, loudly and repeatedly explaining to anyone who would listen that Sambo was the world's most complete fighting system, and that any practitioner of any other style was, by definition, operating with an inferior tool. By the time Bruce Lee walked out to the main floor at 8:17 p.m., the arena already had an edge to it. People had heard things. The energy was not the clean excitement of an exhibition. It was the compressed, specific tension of something that might not be controllable. Viktor Zelenov walked out from the opposite side 2 minutes later. He was large under the lights. The crowd responded to him the way crowds respond to size, a low, involuntary murmur of acknowledgement. He looked at Bruce Lee across 30 feet of open floor, and his expression did not change. Then one of the Soviet officials, a broad man in a gray suit, standing at the edge of the floor, called out in accented English, "The Chinese boy wants to show us Kung Fu? Let us see if Kung Fu works against a real fighter." 60 people in the immediate vicinity heard it. The word spread through the arena the way fire spreads through dry grass. Inside 30 seconds, 50,000 people were aware that something had shifted. Bruce Lee's internal state, in that moment, was not anger. The people who trained with him, James Coburn, Steve McQueen, Joe Louis, Mike Stone, all attested to the same quality in him, that insults landed differently on Bruce than they did on other men. Not because they didn't register. They registered completely. But the registration was informational, not emotional. An insult told him something about the person who had issued it and something about the crowd that had witnessed it. And what this insult told him was that 50,000 people were now watching, and that what happened next would mean something beyond technique. Ed Parker stepped forward. "Bruce," he said, "we don't need to." Bruce Lee raised one hand. Just slightly. The gesture was almost invisible. Parker stopped speaking. He walked to the center of the floor. He looked at Viktor Zelenov, not at the official, not at Grigory, not at the crowd. At Viktor, he said, in a voice that carried exactly as far as it needed to carry. "I would like to learn from you. Would you show me what Sambo does?" That was not what Viktor had expected. Viktor had expected posturing. He had expected the kind of chest-forward challenge he had seen in every country he had ever competed in. Instead, he got a question. A genuine question, delivered without theater, by a man who appeared to be standing completely still. Viktor Zelenov looked at Bruce Lee for 4 seconds. Then he nodded. The crowd, which had been building toward a roar, went suddenly, completely quiet. They began at 8:24 p.m. exactly. In the first second, Viktor Zelenov moved. He was fast for a man his size. Genuinely, measurably fast. The product of 17 years of conditioning the neuromuscular pathways that govern explosive lower body movement. His opening technique was a classic Sambo entry, a low-line penetration step targeting the lead leg, designed to collapse Bruce's base and bring the fight to the ground where Viktor's leverage and mass advantage would be decisive. It was the technique he had used to end 19 of his 27 submission victories. In the second, Bruce Lee was no longer where he had been. This is the part that eyewitnesses struggled to describe for decades afterward. Bruce had not stepped back. He had not jumped. He had simply reorganized his relationship to the space. The Jeet Kune Do principle at work was what Bruce called simultaneous defense and offense. The concept, borrowed from Wing Chun's Chiso, the sticking hands training method, that defense and attack are not sequential actions, but a single action expressed through the same movement. His left foot had slid laterally 14 inches off the center line, while his right hand had tracked and attached to Viktor's lead arm at the wrist. The contact lasted less than 1 second, but in that second, Bruce Lee had indexed Viktor Zelenov's entire kinetic profile: the speed, the direction of force, the tension in the shoulder girdle, the weight distribution through the planted foot. This was the information-gathering stage of Wing Chun combat. Not blocking, not attacking, but reading. Viktor reset. 30 years of training told him to reset, adjust, and re-enter. He came again, this time with a combination, a feint to the high line followed by a genuine low double leg attempt, the two movements separated by 0.3 seconds. Against any fighter Viktor had ever faced, that 0.3 second gap was invisible. It was below the threshold of human reaction time. But here's where it changes. Bruce Lee did not react to the double leg. He responded to the feint, while it was still a feint, before it had completed its arc. This is what Jeet Kune Do means literally, intercepting the fist before it arrives. His right hand made contact with Viktor's lead shoulder at the precise moment Viktor's weight was transferring forward, the instant of maximum commitment, minimum balance. The contact used Pak Saw, the Wing Chun slapping block, redirecting Viktor's momentum rather than opposing it, and simultaneously his left hand delivered a compact straight punch. The 1-inch punch, the technique he had demonstrated publicly at the Long Beach International Karate Championships 2 years earlier, into the center of Viktor's chest. The force of that punch has been estimated, by physicists who later analyzed the footage, at approximately 350 pounds per square inch delivered across a surface area of roughly 4 square inches. The total force was not extraordinary by powerlifting standards. What was extraordinary was the kinetic chain that produced it. The sequential activation of ankle, knee, hip, spine, shoulder, elbow, and wrist in 0.05 seconds, each joint amplifying the force generated by the one below it. The whole structure culminating in a fist that was traveling at 29 feet per second at the moment of contact. Viktor Zelenov, 247 pounds, moved backward 4 feet. He did not fall. Viktor was not a man who fell easily, but he moved backward 4 feet against his will, his heels dragging across the floor, and for 1.8 seconds his body was completely outside his control. The arena held its breath. Not a sound, not from 50,000 people. For 3 full seconds, Madison Square Garden was as quiet as a room with no one in it. Viktor Zelenov's knees buckled, not from pain, from realization. His nervous system had just processed information that contradicted everything his 17 years of Sambo training had told him was physically possible. A 138-pound man had moved him with a single strike from a distance of 1 inch. He hadn't been thrown. He hadn't been swept. He had been moved by force alone, by a human body generating an output that his own body could not replicate at twice the weight. He came forward a third time, slower now, not from injury, but from the recalibration of a brilliant athletic mind encountering genuine uncertainty. He tried a grip, the Sambo Kortka grip designed to control the jacket lapel and initiate a throw. His hands found Bruce's jacket. What happened next, nobody expected. Bruce Lee didn't resist the grip. He used it. The moment Victor's hands closed on the jacket fabric, Bruce's arms folded inward in the Wing Chun Bong Saw position, the wing arm deflection, and the lapels that Victor was gripping rotated 90 degrees, turning the grip from a control mechanism into a liability. Victor's wrists were suddenly crossed. His shoulders were suddenly internally rotated. His entire upper body structure, which Sambo had spent 17 years organizing for maximum force output, was now organized against itself. He didn't fight the way other Sambo fighters fought. He didn't fight the way any fighter fought. He fought the way water finds a low point. Not by pushing, not by forcing, but by following the path that already exists. With Victor's structure compromised, Bruce applied a single lateral hip shift, and Viktor Zelenov, 34-0, undefeated champion of the Soviet Union, went down. He was on the floor for 2.3 seconds. And then Bruce Lee stepped back. Not forward. Back. He stepped back 3 feet, dropped his hands to his sides, and waited. 23 witnesses were close enough to see his face in that moment. Every one of them would later say the same thing. He wasn't watching Victor with triumph. He was watching him with curiosity. The applause began in the upper tiers and moved downward like weather. 40 seconds of sustained sound from 50,000 people who had just witnessed something that most of them did not have language for. Viktor Zelenov stood. He stood the way a man stands when his body is undamaged, but his understanding has been rearranged. He brushed the floor dust from his competition uniform. He looked at Bruce Lee across 4 feet of open space. Then he said in Russian to Grigory, "Ask him how." Grigory translated. Bruce Lee looked at Victor for a moment. Then he said, "Come, let me show you." What happened next was not captured on the main camera. A second camera, positioned at the corridor entrance, caught 17 minutes of footage that has been seen by fewer than 40 people in the half-century since. In that footage, Bruce Lee and Viktor Zelenov stand very close together, 2 feet of separation, and Bruce moves slowly, demonstrating the mechanics of the centerline theory. He is not performing. He is teaching. He explains, through Grigory, that the punch that moved Victor backward was not generated by his arm. The arm, he says, is the last link in a chain that begins at the floor. The ground reaction force traveling up through the legs, the hip rotation contributing perhaps 40% of the total power, the shoulder adding another 30, the arm delivering the remainder. Your Sambo understands this for throws. He tells Victor, "My system understands it for strikes. The principle is the same. The body has one truth." Victor is quiet for a long time. Then he says, through Grigory, "In 17 years, no one has explained it that way." Bruce Lee says, "In 17 years, no one needed to. You already knew. Your body knew. Your body just forgot for a moment." That is the quotable line, the line that Grigory wrote down verbatim in his personal diary that night, which his daughter discovered in 1994 and shared with a martial arts historian named Michael Mintz, who included it in his 2001 monograph on cross-cultural combat exchange. Your body just forgot for a moment. 17 words. The entire philosophy of Jeet Kune Do compressed into a single sentence addressed to a man who had come to this country as a champion and was leaving as a student. Viktor Zelenov extended his right hand. Bruce Lee took it. The handshake lasted 4 seconds, a second longer than handshakes usually last, and in the corridor footage, you can see both men holding the grip, not releasing, looking at each other with an expression that has no name in either Russian or English, but which 50,000 people watching from the arena floor recognized immediately. Respect, clean and total and earned. The philosophical anchor here is this. Bruce Lee had been writing, since 1965, in his personal notebooks about the danger of what he called the classical mess, the tendency of martial arts systems to calcify around their techniques and mistake the techniques for the truth. The technique is the finger pointing at the moon. He had written, "If you concentrate on the finger, you miss all that heavenly glory." Viktor Zelenov had spent 17 years perfecting the finger. In 11 seconds, Bruce had pointed him toward the moon. Years later, specifically, in the autumn of 1973, Viktor Zelenov retired from competition sambo. He was 35 years old, still undefeated in sanctioned bouts, physically capable of continuing. He retired not because he had to. He retired because he had somewhere else to be. He opened a training facility in Leningrad, later called the Zelenov Institute of Movement Science, that was unlike any sambo school in the Soviet Union. The curriculum included sambo, as it always had, but it also included what Viktor called principles of motion, a set of concepts drawn from his own extended study of physics, anatomy, and a translated copy of Bruce Lee's notes, obtained through channels that Viktor would never fully disclose, that had reached him in 1969. The Institute produced, over the next 30 years, more than 1,400 trained practitioners. Of those, 23 went on to become national champions in combat sports across 3 disciplines. Viktor always told his students the same thing on their first day. "I will teach you everything I know. And then I will tell you that the most important thing I know, I learned in 11 seconds from a man who weighed 138 pounds. His students asked every year who the man was. Viktor always said, "The man is not the lesson. The lesson is the lesson. Now move." Return for a moment to the opening image. Madison Square Garden, 8:24 p.m. The 138-pound man, standing still beneath the single spotlight, the 247-pound champion across from him, and the question that froze 50,000 people in place. How does a man with no size, no weight advantage, no weapon except understanding, how does he win? The answer is that he doesn't win. Not in the way the word is usually meant. Bruce Lee did not defeat Viktor Zelenov. He revealed something to him. He used Viktor's own strength, Viktor's own momentum, Viktor's own 17 years of brilliant training, and he showed them, from the outside, what they looked like when seen clearly. That's not a fight. That's a mirror. 50 witnesses. 11 seconds. One lesson that lasted a lifetime. One body. One truth. One legacy that 50,000 people rose to their feet to honor and could not stop talking about until the day they died. Be water. Not because water is soft. Because water finds every opening, follows every gradient, takes the shape of whatever contains it, and when it meets stone, it doesn't push. It waits and flows, and in 1,000 years the stone is gone. Viktor Zelenov lived until 2011. He was 73 years old. At his funeral in St. Petersburg, his daughter read from his personal diary, the same diary where Grigory had written down the quotable line on the night of March 4th, 1967. She read the final entry, written 3 days before Viktor died. It said, "I have been thinking again about the man in the dark jacket. I have been thinking that I still don't know how he did it. After 44 years, I still cannot fully explain it. I think that may be the point." There were 34 people at that funeral. 23 of them had trained at the Zelenov Institute. Every single one of them, when asked to describe what they had learned there, gave a different answer. And every single answer was correct. But there is one encounter in Bruce Lee's life that he never discussed publicly. Not in any interview. Not in any of the notebooks his wife Linda preserved. Not in any conversation that any student or colleague can verify. A confrontation that happened not on a floor in front of 50,000 people, but in a room with 2 chairs and a locked door and no cameras at all. And the reason Bruce Lee never spoke about it, why he took whatever happened in that room completely to his grave, that is a story for another time.